welcome back, everybody. Good afternoon. Almost last session of the day, but quite. So more after this, so hang around. I would do an announcement. MTV will not be presenting today, which is virtually the only change that's happened in the last 2 days of the OMMA mobile program, so I apologize for that. But for various reasons that are way too complex to go into right here, MTV will not be here. However, we do have Old Navy and CP+B and some great stuff. What we are going to do is make this session a little more interactive than we have with some of the other sessions. So instead of doing just a Q&A at the end, we're going to provide the opportunity to do some Q&A sort of as we go along. You're more than welcome to join into that. You're more than welcome to not join into that, in which case we'll not go that route. But they are looking for more feedback because this really is sort of an interactive process, as a lot of this mobile stuff is, where everyone is learning from everybody else. And this is obviously a group that has a lot of collective brain power, so if you want to share that, that will be fine. If anybody wants to text questions, we have been doing the main hall for the last 2 days. You still can text it to me, and that number is 603-531-7949. And now I'll say it slowly in case you're interested in writing it down, because they have it on the screen in the main room. We don't have it on the screen here. But if you want to text a question, don't put yourself on the spot. You're a competitor and you want to ask the question, but you don't really want to ask the question. I will ask it for you totally anonymously. And that number is, and this is my phone, so destroy this number when you're done again, 603-531-7949. And we'll be respectful of your questions. So again, feel free to text them at any time and we'll toss them in. So let's just get into the room. Another session was just ending, which is why I kind of delayed a little bit, waiting for the rest of the people to get here. And we have plenty of seats in various spots to help yourselves, everybody. So many are embracing the concept of mobile first. We just did a conference, the Mobile Insider Summit in Lake Tahoe for 3 days. Anybody go to that Lake Tahoe Summit? I recognize it. Okay, hell yeah. So we spent 3 days, we do this twice a year at the Mobile Insider Summit. We do 3 days at the Media Post event, 3 days in Lake Tahoe in the summer, and then 3 days in Key Largo in the winter, which somebody has to do it, so we do that. It's a great place, but we obviously get a lot of mobile leaders and a lot of heads of marketing because it's a good location, they're big resorts. But the most important thing is we spend a lot of time looking at the future of mobile. Where are things going? We know we're all beyond the mobile is going to be a big thing. We're so far past that, which is really ironic since I'm still running into CEOs saying, you know, mobile is really going to be big. And my reaction is, you think so? It's kind of like the internet. This internet's going to be big. And remember when people just discovered the internet 3 years after, and they thought all of a sudden it was a revolution? They just sort of missed it early on, and that's sort of where a lot of mobile is right now. Anyway, the point of bringing this up is the theme of our conference at the last summit was mobile first. And at MediaPost, we try to be sort of ahead of where things are going. So we were delighted to hear that the approach that Old Navy and CP+B are taking is, in fact, a mobile-first approach, which you're going to hear much more about. So many are embracing the concept of mobile first, but not everyone knows exactly what that means and how to execute against it. Here to show how some of the collaborative process works and to describe what they did are Lesley, Chen, and Angel Anderson. Lesley is the Senior Manager of Marketing at Gap Inc., where she focuses on digital, social, and mobile strategy for the Old Navy brand. She manages online advertising campaigns and works on developing engaging initiatives across multiple digital and social customer touchpoints. Angel Anderson is Experience Director at CP+B and has more than 10 years of experience humanizing digital products and services for clients, including Old Navy, Patel, Best Buy, and American Express. As an aside, she is also what some may call a digital junkie, and I know this for a fact, and got on Twitter so early she actually got her first name as a handle. So if anyone has a first name like Bob, anyway, she's at Angel on Twitter. Please join me in welcoming Lesley and Angel.
So we're going to talk about a mobile-first design case study for Old Navy. And this is a project that we're currently working on. So we're giving you a glimpse of our current process, how it's evolving, what's been working for us. And we're going to start with a high-level 30,000-foot view of the strategy, and then drill down into some specifics. But before we start, I'm here representing the brand side, and Angel here is representing the agency side. So we just want to get kind of a quick head count of who in the room is on the brand side and who is on the agency side. Sounds like we are mostly agency for what it's worth. All right. So Old Navy. If you've seen any of our TV spots this past year or our giant billboard in Soho, you know that our tagline right now is "Come Fun, Come All." And what that means is we are a fun, affordable, and accessible fashion brand for everyone. And everything that we do focuses on the customer first, and we do it with this higher level "Come Fun, Come All" concept. And a recent example of something we've done was an event we did in New York a couple weeks ago for our Rockstar jeans, which is a line of skinny jeans. And at the tail end of Fashion Week, which is generally a week of very exclusive events, we threw our own version of a fashion show. So it was all-inclusive, everyone invited. And what we've heard from the customer is that she got some curves, she doesn't think that she can wear skinny jeans. So we invited women of all sizes, all shapes, all ages, come try on a pair of the Rockstar jeans, rock them down our runway, and then go home with a free pair. And over 600 women did just that. So why am I talking about a fashion show and a mobile presentation? It's to give you all a glimpse of how we approach all of our different marketing touch points here at Old Navy to focus on the customer first. So we know our customer well, we know her behavior, we've named her, her name is Jenny. And everything we do, we think about what would Jenny do and what would Jenny like. So while this fashion show was about product, more than that, it showcased how she looked in our product and how she felt walking down the runway in it. And along with that, our digital campaigns also follow those guidelines. So everything we do in the digital world either solves customer problems and or delivers a differentiated brand right experience.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about a specific recent project that we're actually still in the middle of. So some of the examples that I'm going to show you have been scrubbed and made very generic. And in some cases, I'm going to have to show you examples that aren't even from this project just because we haven't launched this yet. So it's not anything that I can show you or talk to you about specifically. I'm going to focus mostly on the process that we used to get there rather than showing you the actual hard examples of the pieces that went into it. So the project that we're going to be talking about is Black Friday. For the past 3 years, Old Navy and CP+B have partnered to create a microsite to showcase the Black Friday deals for Black Friday weekend. And we've done this for 3 years now. We've learned a ton of lessons year over year. And every time we do it, it gets a little bit better and a little bit more robust. And one of the really interesting trends that we saw in last year's traffic was that we had a big uptick in mobile visits. You'll see that we've had 14% of our traffic come from mobile browsers with a pretty even split between iPhone and Android. And, we thought, oh, 17%, that's kind of cool. And you might think, well, 17% is interesting, but it's not enough, it's not a rallying cry or marching orders necessarily to go off and change your entire process. But when we looked at the traffic year to year over the last 3 years, we realized this steady incline up is only going to speed up and get higher and higher. And what this says to us is that our customers, our Jenny, is actually a little bit ahead of the curve. So you've probably heard the prediction that most websites are going to have mobile majority traffic by 2014. We think Jenny is actually on trend to get there 6 months to a year earlier. And we're seeing this played out each year in our Black Friday microsite. So when we saw that, we realized this is a big opportunity for us to evolve our design process. And what that'll do for us is it'll help us get ahead of that mobile majority curve in 2014. And it'll also help us internally and with our clients to innovate around a new process. So we became kind of enamored of the idea of going mobile first, and definitely it's become a rallying cry within dev circles and UX circles, and probably some of your folks if you're on the agency side have already been kind of saying this mantra, which was put forth by Luke Lebowski in his book Mobile First. So we thought now is the time for us to kind of jump on that. So the first thing that we did whenever we're starting a digital project is we think about the user, we think about the goals of the site. And to kind of kick that off, we met with Old Navy and had had them walk us through that. So do you want to share a little bit of that, Lesley?
So we know that for Black Friday, Jenny is doing an extensive amount of research and prep leading into the shopping weekend. And she's looking for deal information, so she wants to know what's on sale that weekend. She wants to know store hours, so she needs to know when and where to buy those sale items. And she wants tools to help her prep for the weekend. So our Black Friday website is designed to solve the customer need of creating order to an otherwise very chaotic shopping day, shopping weekend, but do it in a fun and unique Old Navy way.
And before I go on, I just want to ask you guys, because I mentioned that we are tracking our customer and seeing how she is behaving in contrast to the general web. Is that something that you guys are doing with your customers too? How many of you know when your target customer is going to be mobile majority? Anybody have an idea? Are you ahead of the curve? Are you behind the curve? Who's tracking that in here? Anybody? Well, then we're way ahead of the curve. It's definitely something that you probably want to jump on, because one of the things that's important to note is when you're deciding whether or not to change your process and deciding whether or not it's time for you to go mobile first, a really important piece is this right for your customer? Your customer might be way behind the curve and not going to be mobile majority for quite some time, or you may find to your delight that they're already there and you've got some catching up to do. So for us, since we know she's going to be ahead of the curve, and we now know what the goals of the site are, deal info, hours, tools to make her feel prepared, we realized that the strategy for our desktop site was not going to be any different than the strategy for our mobile site. So the strategy stayed the same. We wanted to build on what worked in previous years, utility, shareability. We wanted to merge utility with the fun factor, because fun is kind of built into the core platform for Old Navy's brand. And then we also wanted to tell the story of this Black Friday and help her understand that we're thinking of this in terms of like being a fun event, not something to be kind of freaked out about. So the strategy is going to stay the same, but again, we really wanted to evolve our design process. And it was a bit nerve-wracking for us because we weren't sure entirely if this is something that Old Navy would go for. So we made the case with them. We talked about how if we design mobile first, it allows us to collaboratively set priorities. Because if you think about this, if you're designing for a mobile screen, naturally you have to be a little bit more rigorous with what's priority number one, what's priority number two, because you have this narrower screen. So everything has to stack. You no longer have the luxury of having things, in a carousel all on the same kind of visual priority hierarchy kind of spectrum. Everything has to stack on top of itself. So now it's very clear, priority one, priority two, priority three. In a mobile environment, that becomes crystallized. And if you can figure out what your priorities are and get that early foundational agreement, you can then progressively enhance up through tablet, through desktop, through television, and whatever other larger screens are on your horizon. So we brought this to Old Navy, and we were a little nervous. Are they going to go for this? Or are they going to tell us we're nuts? Are they going to say they want to see desktop comps, just like we always show? And to our delight, we were surprised that they were already kind of on board with it. We didn't have to sell it at all. Do you want to talk about the environment at Old Navy that precipitated that?
Yeah, and it was an idea that we loved. We also had noticed the increase in mobile traffic over the years. We knew that she was using her phone, she was using her phone more often, and using her phone for more things. So it made sense to be where she was. And especially in a time like Black Friday, where things are very hectic and she's on the go, we wanted to provide something that was optimized for the screen that's with her at all points in time.
So we started off kind of trying to think through what our process was going to be. And just because we wanted to go mobile first, we didn't want to necessarily have a longer process. We certainly didn't get to move the deadline, because Black Friday is when Black Friday is, and we can't slip that deadline. So we knew that we were going to have to do a little bit more, a little bit faster in order to get this right. So we thought about this in terms of in 3 internal work streams for visual design, user experience design, and development. And then at the top, we wanted to make sure that we were checking in with the client, because when you're collaborating and trying out a new process, one of the key things to get right is to make sure that you have regular check-ins with your client. If you try to do this without, it's going to feel like a black box for them, and I think it's derail the entire thing. So we thought about this in 4 streams, and the first thing that we did was we made sure that we were aligned with Old Navy on the strategy, the content, and the user goals. And once we had that foundational agreement on those key things, we had our very first check-in. So that was the starting point for us, and that's when we kicked the project off. The next thing that we did was our UX team went and started wireframing the mobile experience. Now, in the wireframes, we can start exploring things like, again, the content, the priorities of the content, what are the feature functionalities, what's the navigation, how does a person interact with this, what data do they need at this particular time, and what's the context of this other message that they might get later. So we start working out the structure, the information architecture in our wireframes. And at the same time, our visual design team starts working on style tiles. Now, style tiles is a technique that was popularized earlier this year by a woman named Samantha Warren. It's fairly new in interaction design circles. It's fairly new in design circles, period. And it was even new for us on our team. You can think of digital style tiles as like digital swatches. So if you're going to go get your house decorated, the decorator might bring over swaths of fabric, bits of materials, what kind of wood you're going to have on your countertops, what kind of marble, what kind of granite, et cetera, et cetera. So those style tiles are abstract pieces of what the overall design is going to look like. And again, I can't show you the style tiles that we created on the site because it's still not launched, but I'll show you an example for the Washington Examiner. So this is an example of a style tile where a visual designer was exploring things like logo, typography, color palette, look and feel, mood, font choices, button style. This is all about how you're getting the tone and personality of your content across. And by exploring with different looks, you can say, okay, here's one look that's current and stimulating. Here's another look that's a little bit more authoritative, a little bit more conservative. And then here's one that's a little bit more accessible and friendly. Your visual designer can be exploring this concurrently with your UX team working on the wireframes of the content information architecture so that they now have an understanding, they're moving closer and closer to understanding which swatch are we ultimately going to go with, what carpet are we going to have, what curtains are we going to have as you're designing what the room is going to look like and where the door is supposed to be. So those two things happen in parallel. And because this was new for our designers, we actually created a wireframe for the style tile so that they would know exactly what the functional elements were going to be that they needed to practice designing. You know, how many different ways can we show a deal? How many different ways can we express the logo? What different color palettes do we want to play around with? How do we want to make the interactive pieces like buttons and drop-downs work? So we gave this template to our designers and let them go off in a bunch of different directions. And I will admit here that we were so nervous about this, but this is a piece of the process that we kind of kept close to the vest. And we were a little bit nervous about revealing this wide variety of exploration to the client because they're used to seeing us come in fairly buttoned up. This is the design. And we were nervous that if we revealed that, they might get a little bit put off by the fact that we were going in so many different directions visually. I think in hindsight, the takeaway that I have is it would have been better to include them because now when we have a kind of a fixed design, there are some tweaks that they're making and I'm thinking, gosh, if we had shown them the style tile way back when, we probably could have gotten that input even earlier, in the same way that we got on the wireframes themselves. So when we had this second check-in, we showed them the wireframes, we didn't show them the style tiles, and I think that's something that I would change next time around. The next thing that we did is our UX team started working on the wireframes for desktop. This is usually where we start for a digital project. Now it's the third piece of our process. Well, of course, strategy is always coming first. It's really usually the second piece. Now it's the third. And what's great about this process where the visual designer has already been creating their style tile and you already have your mobile wireframe is that in parallel with us doing the desktop wire, our visual designers could go off and work on comp for the mobile experience because they can take the direction from the style tile that was chosen and they can take the information hierarchy and behavioral functionality from the wireframe and start working on that comp. And in parallel with that, our dev team can start working on a mobile prototype. So now we have have work streams happening across all three of our internal teams, and we're able to check in with the client. So it's not like this big black box where we're going off and doing stuff and then coming back with, 80% of the target hit. They're actually getting to see most of the steps along the way so that we can kind of be in more alignment with them. We're just not living in a world anymore where I can create a wireframe, hand it off to the development team, or hand it off to visual designers, or throw it over the wall. We need much earlier, more frequent collaboration in order to make this work. I think we just lost our connection.
Mike here. Can you talk a little bit about how you're looking at mobile web and web? Typically and traditionally, when we look at websites, it's comprehensive, it's everything. When we're looking at mobile websites, it's a lot less. So how do you reconcile that in this process?
That's a great question. I think you can actually debate that point of whether or not it needs to be based. I would tend to say, and this is based on not just my own personal needs and experience, but also observations in the field, and it's certainly true of Jenny with respect to this site. Women shopping for Black Friday are not interested in doing less just because they have a smaller screen. In fact, they want to do just as much, if not more. They just happen to have a smaller screen. So we had to make sure that there was actual feature parity between the two, which is why I said earlier that the strategy didn't change between the desktop and the mobile site. Now, your mileage may vary. It really depends on the project that you're working on, but don't just make the assumption that the mobile web should just be a stripped-down version of your desktop site. In fact, I would flip that on its head and think, think about all the times that you've been checking in for a flight while you've been, heading to the airport, or shopping for a new microwave while you're sitting in a meeting, or, what have you. The reality is that you want to be able to make those transactions. You want to be able to order a pizza. You want to be able to research, a car that you might be considering buying. All of that information and transactional capability is still necessary for you, and you don't want any less of it just because you happen to only have your phone with you at the moment.
So this sounds like a different model. If you look at airlines, for example, the Delta Airlines site versus their app are totally different.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're talking about is basically increasing functionality of the website, if I get this correctly. So actually increasing more functionality across the platform, if that's correct?
Well, again, your mileage may vary. You got to look at what your customers are doing and make a decision based on their behavior. But if you think about that stat of mobile majority by 2014, a lot of the people who are going to be accessing the web for the first time post 2014 are only ever going to see the internet through a small screen. They're not going to buy a big laptop computer. They're not going to be able to afford a tablet, but they will be able to afford a very, cheap, lightweight smartphone. And that will be their only portal into the internet. So if you're not prepared to do business with them, by all means, cut your features out and don't allow them to do transactions. But if you want to have all those brand new eyeballs who are getting into the web post 2014 with only a phone, I would say it's really important to think about that and make sure you are going to support their needs.
Yeah, my question, because this is actually a very, especially how you said you sold it to the client. How do you get brands away from, because you're talking about a small screen, so there's only so much you can say. Whereas a brand wants to show you as much as possible, content-wise, when you come in, and then you have your whole choices to go through. This is more functional, right? Because they want to do something, and that's what's driving the engagement. Well, how do you talk about brands, for example, in the healthcare industry, which is where I am, where it's not so much doing, it's more like reading. You want to read about the safety of a drug. You want to read about its efficacy. Does mobile first come into that kind of architecture, even though more people are accessing medical information on their phone?
I think increasingly you're going to have to make sure that all of the information that's available on desktop is available through the phone. And to be clear, we did not have to sell this to you guys. We brought it to them a little bit nervous, and we were delighted. Like, we're very lucky to work with very savvy clients like Old Navy. But I think for your particular instance, I would say a great example of that difference between mobile and desktop.
Yeah.
Check out Smart Car. I'm shopping for a car. I just got in a car accident. But I got into a car accident recently, and I'm now going to have to buy a new car. And I've been shopping online and trying to figure out what's fuel efficient, what's going to fit into tiny little compact parking spaces in Trader Joe's. And smart cars seem like a good bet. And we had this idea while we were driving around to different dealerships. And I went on my phone to check out smart car. The smart car, I wish I could bring it up for you. The smart car mobile site is phenomenal. And it's all about conveying information. There's not any transactional capability on the site. It's really, I mean, you can request information or you can set up an appointment, but it's really about conveying the brand platform of Smart Car and what their philosophy is, and what are all the features and selling points. The fact that it's 85% recyclable, the fact that the electric car is coming out soon, and it's going to have 87 miles to the gallon or something crazy. And you can go through that experience really beautifully on a phone. And I think precisely because it's a small screen, the designers gave themselves a little bit of breathing room. Instead of looking at a screen where you have a ton of options, and as a user, you're kind of got this paradox of choice. What do I look at? Am I supposed to be looking for information about, doctors, or am I supposed to be looking up prescription stuff, or, is this where I can go to find information about what's covered by my insurance? When you go to a desktop site, you often have all these choices kind of on the same level of hierarchy. In mobile, a designer makes a smart decision based on user behavior and says, this is what most people want. Let's just stick it at the top, all by itself. And that's what the smart car site does really well. It's stacked on top of each other, and you have these beautiful moments where you can look at that, and I don't know how it's on Android. I'm giving you this, but I think it looks good on Android because it's a website, not an app. But worth checking out, you get this beautiful moment, and then you can scroll through and hear, oh, and it's recyclable. Oh, and they've got this philosophy of only having 2 seats because over like 9 million seats go empty every day during the commute for most Americans. And it kind of drew me into the story one bite at a time. And it was presented in the order that I kind of instinctively wanted it to be, because the designer spent some time thinking through that, rather than just everything has to be above the fold because you have all the different competing, players insisting that they have to have their message at the top. If you have mobile, there can really only be one winner in that, and it's usually the one that's the best for the user. So I would argue not only do you need to make that decision, when your customers are there, but they're probably going to have a better experience there than they would on desktop once you start getting that right, because you can only feed them one bite at a time instead of trying to fire hose them with every option possible. So I think ultimately it's going to be better for users when we're all on a smaller screen, because we're going to get more focused design and more focused feature functionality.
Right, and just echoing on that, I don't think it's a matter of increasing or decreasing the functionality of a mobile site versus a desktop site. I think the information is going to be similar, and Angel touched upon this earlier, it's about prioritizing. So because you have a smaller screen, you've got to have a very specific hierarchy and flow that makes sense to the user looking on tiny screen versus the computer. So information similar, flow probably a little bit different.
What about taking advantage of the data capabilities of the device that would make it more complication-based?
So there are technologies like PhoneGap that will allow us to use some of those feature functionalities. I think over time those are going to get better. Right now for the mobile web, depending on the audience, we tend to shy away from PhoneGap sometimes because it's still a little bit buggy, or that's been our experience. There are other projects that we do use PhoneGap to make that leap. But I think probably as smartphones evolve, they will probably put more API hooks in so that developers can use those native functionalities like location detection, et cetera, et cetera. And PhoneGap will, it's filling the gap essentially until both sides kind of can meet in the middle. And I think over time that'll be the case, and then you'll be able to use that stuff. But for now, just getting the information right so that it's digestible. And again, if you're thinking about priorities, it's no longer about this team wants this message here, and this other department needs to have these choices above the fold, and this other department wants this above the fold. All of that arguing kind of goes by the wayside when you've only got a small screen. First and foremost, like not savvy brands don't even fight over what's going to be on mobile. So you actually have a little bit of breathing room to just design what's right for your customer, because in many cases the brand isn't even prioritizing that internally and focusing on that. So you can just quietly do the right thing without the argument. Once they are aware of how important mobile becomes, you still are, I think, going to have an ultimately a better experience because you're going to be able to make the case that a person can only see and focus on one or two things in a mobile screen at a time. You just can't bombard them the way that you can on a big desktop experience. So this is kind of how our process was evolving. And your mileage may vary. Each time we got to a new milestone, we realized, oh, there's room for more improvement. The next thing that we did was we had our visual design team start working on the desktop experience. And in parallel with that, our development team started prototyping the desktop experience. And UX kind of was the glue between us to make sure that the intent of the user experience was being met across the board. And when we're finished with this, that'll be our final check-in. Now, to say that we've only had 4 check-ins is not actually entirely accurate. We actually meet every Wednesday, and we have big meetings every other couple of Wednesdays when we get to one of these points. But the main thing is that we're collaborating pretty much in lockstep the entire time. But this isn't a silver bullet. So if this process doesn't work for you, throw it out and try something new. You kind of have to be not afraid to try new things, especially now because the web is evolving, and you have to evolve along with the web and also with your customers' behavior. So for us, it's really a constant evolution. Our methods are evolving all the time, and I'd love to hear from you guys if you've tried something like this. Has anybody done anything like this? I mean, this is what we're calling mobile first. What does it look like for you guys? Does anybody have something similar to this, or something that contrasts with the process that we just showed? We're way ahead of the game. Awesome.
Yeah, back here.
Hi, yeah, I've done this actually a lot. Sure, Nomi Kaplan, Vanguard Direct. We do this often because our clients come to us and they want a mobile app, and then we're like, oh, we actually need a site to support it. So it's sort of, the browser becomes an afterthought almost, in which cases it's great. And I was wondering if you were experiencing, I have two questions. One, I was wondering if you're experiencing that mobile design is actually affecting then how you are designing for the browser.
Yes.
We're finding it's much easier to have, to simplify browser experiences after you've had those mobile sites or conversations.
And I think that comes down to that early alignment on priority. Once you've already come to Jesus on mobile wireframes and decided priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, that's set. That doesn't really change. And when you get to a wider screen, you can do interesting things that you can't necessarily do in desktop, do in mobile. Like you can have parallaxing, you can do animation, you can probably rely on faster processing speed. So there are other kind of bells and whistles that you can add. But we're finding that a lot of our designs, like you said, because the priority is already set, it kind of gives us some playtime room to do some kind of fun, interactive things with motion. And we're noticing that a lot of the sites that we design, when we start from mobile first, we actually think in a longer scroll and not get cut off at all anymore in what's above the fold, what's below the fold, not nearly to the same degree that we used to.
Where does content?
Oh, wait 1 sec. We're streaming this live so people can't hear it if you don't use the mic. That's why we walk around with the mic.
Got it.
Who's the question?
Craig Davis from Relevance. I'm hearing a lot about the visual design and creative, visual creative. Where does the content come into this collaboration process? And how do you guys, at which point do you fold that into the sort of strategy when it comes to designing the presence on mobile and the web?
So content is really right in the very, very beginning. When you're talking about design, when you're talking about design for use, it begins with content. Design without content is simply decoration. So content has to be the thing that you're thinking of first, and you can't really create a site without first understanding the content that you're trying to deliver in that website. So you'll notice in the blue box where we started, strategy, user goals, content, that's the foundation. So it begins very early on. Now, we don't have, at CPB, we don't typically use separate content strategists. We have cognitive anthropologists who help us understand the cultural tensions. We have user experience designer who plays sometimes an information architecture role, sometimes a content strategy role, sometimes a planning role, and certainly an interaction design role. And then we also have client engagement people who are actually working with the client to find out exactly what's the product database, what are the attributes that we can play with, what kind of information can we pull back, and what can we share out with other systems. So that begins right from the beginning. Again, content is the cornerstone of all of this, because any kind of design without content is simply decoration.
Right, and Old Navy typically comes.
Sorry.
This isn't that important, but Old Navy usually drives that conversation between the two of you. Old Navy drives that conversation when it comes to, thinking about personalization of the content and thinking about all of those other requirements that they're really focused on in this sort of round of their mobile presence. Does Old Navy come up with that, or do you guys make suggestions? How does that typically work?
We work together. Do you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, the content, like Angel said, it's what starts the whole process. Our content is also a solution, because that's what our customers are there to find on the website. So it's shaping, there's a basic set of information that we're providing to Kristen to lay out the entire framework of the site. But how that content is expressed will kind of evolve along with the design process. So how it's showing up, what we're adding to it is going to change along the way, but the basic structure and the basic information is set from the very beginning.
Lesley and Angel, can you both talk a bit about, now that you have this process and it's obviously looking like it's working, how do you separately, as Gap brands and as CPB, do you extend this across your organizations, or is this it?
I'll let you go first.
This is kind of one of our key takeaways. So jumping ahead, solving for customer behavior and for customer problems, we realized that mobile is a very important component of our digital strategy. And it's not something that we can just think of as an afterthought. So with this project as a kickoff and moving forward, we're bringing mobile in earlier into the process. So we designed with mobile in mind so that our overall experience is very seamless and consistent across all of our
So
digital.
design with mobile in mind, or design with starting with mobile?
This is our first project with mobile first, so it will just have to depend on what our objectives are, but definitely mobile early on, if not first.
Okay, Kristen?
So we are actually starting to embrace this agency-wide. There was, I don't know if mandate's too strong a word, there was a very strong email sent out by one of the senior folks in our production staff saying that any digital work that we do that doesn't have the mobile piece thought out is considered a fail. And given the lesson that we've learned on this particular piece, and how much easier it is to start from the small screen and then progressively enhance up, rather than start big and then try to shoehorn things back down into a small area, it helps us realize that we have a smoother internal process when we do this way. So we're actually rolling this process out agency-wide across all 6 offices. It's definitely going to be a tool in our toolkit. I won't say that every single project that we do from now on is going to be mobile first, because you can never set a rule like that in stone, but it's definitely something that's top of mind for us and one of the strong arrows in our quiver, so to speak. But it's something that, we're still evolving this. This is our first time really doing this and partnering so strongly with an agency like Old Navy. And we kind of got lucky. Like I said, we didn't have to sell this really hard to Old Navy. And so, they partnered with us on this kind of inaugural journey. And now we have the very hard job of perhaps convincing all of our other clients that this is the way to go. So, that's going to depend too. But we're evolving it and continuing to move forward so we can match our user behavior. Because at the end of the day, it's all about Jenny for us. And we're still you know, even though we're making these changes, we're still keeping true to the brand, keeping true to the customer, and keeping true to our other internal processes. Our shop is an agile dev shop as well as a digital design and full service media agency. And when we're designing, we're still working in this kind of cyclical fashion. There's cycles of think, make, no, think, make, check, where we're doing research and ideation, and then prototyping and wireframing, and then testing and making sure that we're hitting our KPIs. And that still is happening even through this four-level process. But we do this so that we can get an experience that's right for Jenny. It's really all about her.
Right, so this last image is a photo from our Rockstar event in New York, and you can see the audience is filled with, it's very dark, but they're all women, trust me. They're all holding up their phones, and partly it's because Backstreet Boys are on stage and they're singing to them. But also it's because it's the natural behavior. Jenny's using her phone. And so as her behavior is changing, and as her needs are changing, we want to change along with her. And like Angel said, it's all about Jenny, and we want to be whenever and wherever she is.
As we get the next panel going, we're going to ask if Lesley and Angel could go to the back of the room if anyone has any individual questions, because every panel we've had individual questions, people want to go up and ask privately.